The thunder rolled across the Wyoming sky as Beau Keller stared at 3 fresh graves dug into the unforgiving earth of his homestead. The crosses, made from timber he'd cut with his own hands, bore the names of his wife and 2 young children. The drought of 1874 had destroyed his crops, and the harsh winter that followed had taken everything else. Hunger had slowly stolen their lives while he watched helplessly, too proud to beg and too stubborn to leave the land they'd claimed as their own. "I failed you," he whispered, his voice catching on the wind. "I'm sorry." The 28-year-old rancher adjusted his worn hat and turned his back on the graves. There was nothing left for him here. His cattle were dead, his fields barren, and his heart emptier than both. He mounted his horse, the only living thing he had left besides himself, and rode away without looking back. A man couldn't live on memories alone. 2 days of hard riding brought him to the small town of Cottonwood Springs. His body ached from the journey, and his stomach growled with a familiar emptiness that had become his constant companion. The main street was busy despite the early hour, with merchants setting up their stalls and cowboys stumbling out of the saloon after a long night. Beau hadn't planned to stop here, but his horse needed rest and water. As he dismounted in front of the general store, his legs nearly buckled beneath him. When was the last time he'd eaten? 2 days. 3. The days had begun to blur together since the funerals. The bell above the door jingled as he entered the store, and the smell of fresh bread hit him like a physical blow. His mouth watered and his stomach cramped painfully. "Can I help you, mister?" The shopkeeper eyed him warily, taking in his dirty clothes and haggard appearance. "Water for my horse," Beau mumbled, digging into his pocket for the few coins he had left. Not enough for food, but enough for the horse. The animal deserved better than to suffer for his failures. As he counted the meager sum onto the counter, the door opened again, and a woman entered, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. She was perhaps 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and a simple calico dress that had been mended multiple times. "Morning, Mr. Peterson. I've brought those pies you ordered for the church social," she said cheerfully before noticing Beau. Their eyes met, and something in her expression changed. Not pity he couldn't have borne, pity but recognition of a sort, as if she could see the grief that clung to him like a second skin. "Miss Beatrice, perfect timing as always," the shopkeeper replied. "Just set them behind the counter. I'll have the payment for you tomorrow." She nodded and moved past Beau, the scent of apple and cinnamon following her. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on gathering his coins when the shopkeeper shook his head. "Keep your money, mister. Look like you need it more than I do." Beau stiffened. "I don't take charity." The woman Beatrice spoke from behind the counter where she was arranging her pies. "It's not charity to help a neighbor, sir." "We're not neighbors," Beau replied gruffly. "Just passing through." She studied him for a moment, then reached into her basket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "At least take this for your journey. It's just some bread and cheese." His pride warred with his hunger. "I can't pay you." "I didn't ask for payment," she said simply. "There's a water pump out back for your horse. And if you're looking for work, my brother needs help at our farm just north of town." Beau wanted to refuse, to walk out and continue his aimless journey away from the memories, but something in her steady gaze held him in place. "Why would you help a stranger?" Beatrice Greenwood smiled, a genuine expression that reached her clear brown eyes. "Because you look like a man who's lost more than just his way." The truth of her words struck him harder than any physical blow. He took the package with a nod of thanks and retreated outside to tend to his horse, his heart hammering in his chest for reasons he couldn't explain. The water pump was where she'd said it would be, and his horse drank gratefully while Beau unwrapped the food. The bread was still warm and the cheese was fresh. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be his last. For so long he had given his portions to his family, watching them grow thinner despite his sacrifice. The memory robbed the food of its taste, and he had to force himself to finish. "You should eat more slowly," a voice said from behind him. "Your stomach's probably not used to it." Beatrice stood there, another basket in her hands. The morning sun caught in her hair, highlighting strands of copper among the auburn. "I'm used to going without," he replied, wrapping the remaining cheese back in the cloth. "I can see that." She set the basket down on a nearby stump. "There's more food here and some clean clothes that might fit you. My brother Bennett is about your size." Beau shook his head. "I told you I can't pay. And I told you I'm not asking for payment." She crossed her arms. "But if your pride won't let you take it freely, then come work it off. We need help with the spring planting. I'm not a farmer. Were you born knowing how to do everything you know now?" She challenged. "You can learn." He almost smiled at her persistence. "Almost." "Why are you doing this?" She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "Because someone once did the same for me and my brother when we had nothing. Now we have enough to share." Beau looked at his horse, then back at the road leading out of town. He had no destination in mind, no purpose beyond putting distance between himself and his pain. "Just for a few days," he finally conceded. "Until I earn what you've given me." Beatrice nodded, seeming to understand that was all he could promise. "The farm is 3 miles north. Follow the creek. I'll tell Bennett you're coming." She turned to leave, then paused. "I didn't get your name." Beau Keller." "Well, Mr. Keller, I hope you find what you're looking for." With that, she walked away, leaving him wondering what exactly she thought he was seeking. The Greenwood farm was modest but well-maintained, with fields stretching toward the horizon and a sturdy 2-story farmhouse at its center. A barn painted the same faded red stood nearby, and chickens pecked contentedly in a fenced yard. It was everything his own homestead might have become if fate had been kinder. Bennett Greenwood was waiting when Beau arrived, a tall man with the same auburn hair as his sister, but with a weathered face that spoke of long days under the sun. "Bea said you'd be coming," he greeted, extending a hand. "She has a habit of collecting strays." Beau bristled slightly but shook the offered hand. "I'm no stray, just passing through and willing to work for what I've been given." Bennett's eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed Beau. "Fair enough. Can you handle a plow?" "I've worked my share of fields." "Good. You can start by helping me turn the south field. We're late getting the spring wheat in." The work was hard, but Beau welcomed it. Physical labor had always been his salvation, the one thing that silenced the thoughts in his head. By sundown, his muscles ached pleasantly, and the gnawing in his stomach was from honest hunger rather than grief. Beatrice called them in for supper as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the farmyard in golden light. The kitchen was warm and smelled of fresh bread and stew, reminding Beau painfully of his own home before tragedy struck. He hesitated at the doorway. "Are you coming in?" Beatrice asked, noticing his reluctance. "The food will get cold." "I can eat in the barn," he offered. He'd washed at the pump outside, but he was still a stranger, and sharing their table felt like an intrusion. "Nonsense. We eat together in this house," she stated firmly. "Now sit down before Bennett eats everything. He has the appetite of 3 men. Her brother chuckled as he took his seat. "Only when Bea cooks. When it's my turn, I mysteriously lose my hunger." "That's because the last time you cooked, you nearly burned down the kitchen," Beatrice retorted, ladling stew into bowls. Their easy banter was another reminder of what Beau had lost, but he sat down anyway, murmuring thanks when she placed a bowl before him. The stew was rich with vegetables and chunks of beef, better than anything he'd eaten in months. "This is good," he said after a few bites. Beatrice smiled. "Thank you, it's nothing fancy, but it fills the stomach." "Where are you from, Keller?" Bennett asked between mouthfuls. "Northeast of here. Had a ranch near the Montana border." "Had?" Bennett's question hung in the air. Beau set down his spoon, his appetite suddenly diminished. "Lost it." Drought took the crops, winter took the cattle. Understanding dawned on Bennett's face. "Hard times all around. Lot of folks lost everything these past couple years." Beau nodded stiffly, not wanting to explain further, not wanting to say that he'd lost far more than land and livestock. Beatrice, sensing his discomfort, changed the subject. "Mr. Peterson tells me the railroad might be coming through next year, says it'll change everything." "That's what they always say," Bennett replied, "but I'll believe it when I see the first train pull into town." The conversation shifted to local matters, and Beau was grateful for the reprieve. He finished his meal in silence, observing the siblings. There was an ease between them that spoke of shared hardship and mutual dependence. He wondered about their parents, about how they'd come to be alone, but he didn't ask. Questions invited questions in return. After supper, Bennett showed him to a small room off the kitchen. "It's not much, but it's dry and the mattress is clean." "It's fine, thank you." Beau set his few belongings on a chair. Bennett lingered in the doorway. "Bea told me you're just passing through, but if you decide to stay longer, we could use the help through planting season. Pays fair." The offer was tempting. The farm was well run and the work would keep him occupied. But staying meant putting down roots, however temporary, and Beau wasn't ready for that. "I'll think on it," he replied non-committally. Bennett seemed satisfied with that answer. "Get some rest. Morning comes early around here." Left alone, Beau sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands over his face. For the first time in weeks, his stomach was full and his body was comfortably tired. But the emptiness inside remained, a void where his heart used to be. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of his wife's face as she slipped away, of his children's cries when hunger pains kept them awake at night. He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. Rather than trying to sleep again, he dressed quietly and slipped outside. The air was crisp, stars still bright in the pre-dawn sky. He made his way to the barn where his horse nickered softly in greeting. "At least you're doing better," he murmured, stroking the animal's nose. "Early riser, I see." Beatrice's voice came from the barn door. She was already dressed, a lantern in her hand casting a soft glow over her features. "Never could sleep past first light," he replied, though it was a lie. Before, he'd enjoyed lingering in bed, his wife's warmth beside him, his children's laughter eventually rousing them both. She seemed to know he wasn't being truthful but didn't challenge him. "Well, since you're up, you can help me collect eggs and milk the cow. Then we'll have breakfast before the real work begins." The routine of farm chores was familiar, almost comforting. Beatrice worked alongside him, efficient and knowledgeable. She didn't fill the silence with needless chatter but spoke when necessary, showing him where things were kept and how they liked things done. "You've been running this place a long time," he observed as they carried milk and eggs back to the house. "Since our parents died 10 years ago. I was 15, Bennett was 17. She glanced at him. "We nearly lost it all that first year. Didn't know the first thing about farming." "How did you manage?" "Neighbors helped, and we learned fast because we had to." She set the egg basket on the porch. "What about you? Were you always a rancher?" The question was innocent enough, but it opened a door Beau wasn't ready to walk through. "I worked cattle since I was old enough to sit a horse," he said, offering only part of his story. Beatrice studied him for a moment. "Some things are too hard to talk about. I understand that. but keeping everything bottled up inside doesn't make it easier to bear. Before he could respond, Bennett emerged from the house, yawning widely. "You two are up early. Is there coffee?" "There will be once you make it," Beatrice replied with a smile. "I've got breakfast to cook." The day fell into a pattern similar to the one before. Beau worked alongside Bennett in the fields while Beatrice tended to the household chores and the vegetable garden near the house. By evening, they'd made good progress on preparing the soil for planting. Days turned into a week, then two. Beau kept telling himself he would leave soon, once he'd properly repaid their kindness. But each morning found him rising with the sun, falling into the rhythm of farm life as if he belonged there. It was during the third week that the nightmares finally eased. He still woke thinking of his family, but the crushing grief that had been his constant companion began to soften around the edges. He found himself noticing the beauty of the sunrise, appreciating the taste of food again, and sometimes even joining in the conversation at mealtimes. And he found himself watching Beatrice. The way she hummed while kneading bread, how she paused to observe birds in the garden, the gentle way she spoke to the animals. She had a quiet strength about her that he admired, a resilience that had allowed her to build a life from tragedy. One evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Bennett announced he needed to go into town the next day to arrange for the sale of last season's remaining grain. "I'll be gone overnight," he told them. "The buyer's coming from Cheyenne, and he won't arrive until late." "I can manage things here," Beatrice assured him. "Beau will help with the heavy work." Bennett glanced between them, something knowing in his expression. "I'm sure he will." He rose and stretched. "Think I'll turn in early. Morning comes fast." After he left, a comfortable silence settled between Beau and Beatrice. The spring evening was mild, with a chorus of frogs singing from the creek and fireflies beginning to flicker in the gathering dusk. "You never talk about them," Beatrice said softly after a while. "Your family." Beau tensed. "How did you know?" "The way you look sometimes, when you think no one's watching, and there's a ring mark on your finger where a wedding band used to be." He unconsciously rubbed his left hand where the pale line still showed. "I took it off when I buried her. I'm sorry." She didn't press for more, just let the words hang in the night air. Perhaps it was the gentle darkness or the distance from his homestead, but Beau found himself speaking. "Her name was Mary. We were married 6 years, had 2 children. Joshua was 5, Emma was 3. Beatrice remained quiet, allowing him space to continue. "The drought came first, killed our crops and most of the grass for the cattle, then the winter." He swallowed hard. "It was the coldest I'd ever seen. Cattle died in the fields, game was scarce. Our food stores ran out by January." His voice grew rougher as he continued. "I tried hunting, even went to the nearest town for work, but there wasn't enough. They got weaker. First Emma, then Joshua. Mary held on the longest, insisted I eat what little we had." His hands clenched into fists. "I should have done more. Should have seen it coming and gotten them out before winter." "You couldn't have known," Beatrice said gently. "A man is supposed to provide for his family." The bitterness in his voice was directed entirely at himself. "I failed them." "You did everything you could in impossible circumstances," she countered. "That's not failure." Beau shook his head, unable to accept her absolution. "I buried them side by side under the cottonwood tree where we used to have picnics in summer, made the crosses myself." He fell silent, remembering the blisters on his hands from carving their names. Beatrice reached out hesitantly and laid her hand over his. "Grief is a heavy burden to carry alone." The simple touch broke something open inside him. Tears he'd refused to shed at the funerals finally came, silent and hot on his cheeks. He didn't pull away from her hand, grateful for the anchor as he weathered the storm of his grief. When the tears finally subsided, He felt hollowed out but somehow lighter. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "Don't apologize for being human," she replied. Her hand was still on his, warm and steady. They sat in silence as the stars emerged overhead, neither moving away from the connection between them. It was the closest Beau had felt to another person since burying his family, and it terrified him as much as it comforted him. The next morning brought a new awkwardness between them. Bennett left early for town, leaving them alone on the farm. They worked separately for most of the day, Beau mending fences while Beatrice tended to the garden and preserved early spring vegetables. It was mid-afternoon when dark clouds began rolling in from the west, bringing with them the smell of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. "Storm's coming," Beau called to Beatrice, who was hanging laundry on the line. She glanced at the sky, quickly gathering the wet clothes. "Looks like a big one. Better get the animals in." They worked together to secure the farm before the storm hit, bringing chickens into their coop, leading the milk cow into the barn, and making sure everything that could blow away was tied down or brought inside. The rain began just as they finished, fat drops quickly turning into a downpour. They raced to the house, already soaked by the time they reached the porch. "That came on fast," Beatrice said, laughing as she wrung water from her skirt. Beau found himself smiling at the sight of her hair plastered to her face, dress clinging to her frame. "Reminds me of those summer storms back home," he said without thinking. Her smile softened. "You called it home," he hadn't realized. "Force of habit, I guess." "Is it?" She met his gaze steadily. "Or is it because you're starting to think about the future again instead of just surviving the past?" The question struck too close to thoughts he'd been avoiding. "I don't know if I have a right to a future when they don't," he admitted. Beatrice stepped closer to him, still dripping from the rain. "Everyone who's still breathing has a right to a future, Beau, including you." Thunder crashed overhead, making her jump slightly. Their proximity suddenly felt charged with more than just the electricity in the air. Beau was acutely aware of how easily he could reach out and touch her, how much he wanted to. But memory and guilt held him back. "I should check the barn, make sure everything's secure," he said, stepping away from her. "Beau," she began, but he was already heading back into the rain, grateful for the cold water that cleared his head. The storm raged for hours, lightning splitting the sky and thunder shaking the walls of the barn where Beau had taken shelter. He busied himself with unnecessary tasks, reorganizing tools, sweeping already clean floors, anything to keep his mind off the woman in the house and the feelings she stirred in him. It was nearly dark when the rain finally slackened to a gentle patter. Beau made his way back to the house, mud sucking at his boots with each step. He hesitated at the door, considering whether to remove his filthy footwear or go around to the back entrance. Before he could decide, the door swung open to reveal Beatrice, a lantern in her hand. "I was beginning to think you'd decided to sleep in the barn," she said, her tone light but her eyes searching his face. "Thought about it," he admitted, "but it's a bit drafty out there." She stepped back to let him in. "Take off those boots and go change. I've kept supper warm for you." The house smelled of fresh bread and beef stew, the same meal she'd first served him weeks ago. Beau did as she instructed, changing into dry clothes and returning to find the table set for two, a steaming bowl waiting for him. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. "I've been thinking," Beatrice said finally, setting down her spoon. "Bennett and I have more land than we can properly work ourselves. The northeast section, it's good land, but we haven't planted it in 2 years for lack of time and help." Beau paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we could use a partner, Someone to work that section, share in the planting and harvesting. You'd have a place to stay, food on the table, and a share in the profits. The offer took him by surprise. You barely know me. I know enough, she countered. I know you're hardworking and honest. I know you care about doing things right. And I know you need a new start as much as that land needs tending. Beau set down his spoon, his appetite gone. I can't replace what I lost. I'm not asking you to. Her voice was gentle but firm. I'm offering you a chance to build something new, something different. The idea was both tempting and terrifying. Staying meant allowing himself to put down roots, to care again, to risk loss. But leaving meant continuing the aimless wandering that had brought him here, running from memories he could never escape. I need time to think, he said finally. Beatrice nodded, understanding in her eyes. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. After supper, they sat by the fire, the rain having brought a chill to the evening air. Beau stared into the flames, thinking about her offer and what it might mean. A partnership on the farm meant a future here with her and Bennett. It meant allowing himself to become part of something again, to belong somewhere. Tell me about them, Beatrice said suddenly. Your wife and children, what were they like? The request startled him. People usually avoided mentioning the dead, unsure how to navigate another's grief. But Beatrice's expression held only genuine interest, a desire to know the people who had shaped him. Mary was strong, he began hesitantly. Stronger than me in many ways. She could shoot as straight as any man and cook better than most women. She had this laugh that just filled a room. A small smile touched his lips at the memory. And she loved wildflowers, used to bring them inside all summer, put them in jars around the house. She sounds wonderful, Beatrice said softly. She was. Beau's voice grew steadier as he continued. Joshua was all boy, always running, climbing, asking questions faster than we could answer them. Had my stubbornness and his mother's smile. And Emma, she was quiet, watchful. Had these big eyes that seemed to see everything, loved stories, would sit for hours if you'd read to her. His throat tightened. She used to say she was going to write books when she grew up. Beatrice moved closer, her shoulder touching his. They're still with you, you know, in here. She touched her hand lightly to his chest. They'll always be part of who you are. The simple truth of her words broke through the last of his resistance. He caught her hand and held it against his heart. Thank you, he said roughly, for seeing me. For not letting me starve not just my body but my soul. Her eyes widened slightly at his words, but she didn't pull away. I recognized something in you that first day in the store, a hunger that went deeper than food. And you decided to feed that too, he asked, a hint of wonder in his voice. Then I will feed you all again, she whispered, echoing words she'd never actually said, but somehow had been offering him all along. Beau wasn't sure who moved first, only that suddenly her face was closer, and then his lips were on hers, gentle but certain. She responded with a softness that belied the strength he knew she possessed, her hand still pressed against his heart. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I don't know if I'm ready, he admitted, but I want to be. We have time, she assured him. There's no rush. The rain continued through the night and into the following day. Bennett returned in the afternoon, soaked and grumbling about the muddy roads but pleased with the deal he'd struck for their grain. Got a fair price, he announced as he hung his wet coat by the door. Better than I expected, actually. That's good news, Beatrice replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. We've been discussing something while you were gone. Bennett raised an eyebrow, looking between them. Have you now, and what might that be? Beatrice explained her proposal about the northeast section of land, watching her brother's reaction carefully. What do you think? Bennett took a long sip of his coffee, considering. I think it's a sound idea. That land's just sitting there and we could use the help. He turned to Beau. "Assuming you're interested in staying." Beau had spent most of the night thinking about Beatrice's offer and about Beatrice herself. The kiss they'd shared had awakened feelings he'd thought were buried with his wife, bringing both guilt and hope in equal measure. "I'm interested," he said finally, "but I want to be a full partner, put in the work, share the risks as well as the rewards." Bennett nodded approvingly. "Sounds fair to me. We can draw up terms that work for everyone." "There's something else you should know," Beau added, glancing at Beatrice. "I care about your sister, more than just as a friend or business partner." Bennett's expression didn't change. "I'd have to be blind not to have noticed that. Question is, what do you plan to do about it? Take it slow. Do things right." Beau met the other man's gaze squarely. "I've lost one family. I'm not in a hurry to build another, but I won't pretend there's nothing between us." Bennett studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Bee's got a good head on her shoulders. I trust her judgment." He drained his coffee cup. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get out of these wet clothes before I catch my death." After he left, Beatrice moved to stand beside Beau. "You didn't have to tell him," she said softly. "Yes, I did. I'm done with running from things. If I'm staying, if we're going to see where this leads, I want it to be open and honest from the start." She smiled, reaching for his hand. "I like the sound of that." Spring turned to summer, and with it came the hard work of tending crops and preparing for harvest. Beau threw himself into rehabilitating the northeast section, clearing brush and preparing the soil for fall planting. The physical labor was a balm to his soul, giving him purpose and direction again. His relationship with Beatrice grew slowly, built on shared work and quiet evenings on the porch. She never pushed him to move faster than he was ready, understanding that healing took time. He found himself sharing more stories about Mary and the children, finding that speaking of them kept their memories alive rather than reopening wounds. By late summer, the nightmares had all but stopped. In their place came dreams of possibility: a new cabin on the northeast section, children running through fields of wheat, Beatrice's smile in the morning light. It was on a warm August evening, with the first hint of fall in the air, that Beau finally found the courage to speak of the future. "I've been thinking about building a house," he said as they walked along the creek that marked the boundary of what had become his section of the farm. "Something simple to start, but with room to grow." Beatrice glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "Is that so? And who would live in this house?" "Well, that depends," he replied, stopping to face her. "I was hoping you might consider sharing it with me, as my wife." Her smile widened, eyes bright with emotion. "Are you asking me to marry you, Beau Keller?" "I believe I am." He took her hands in his. "I know it hasn't been that long, and I can't promise I'm completely healed. But I love you, Beatrice. You brought me back to life when all I wanted was to disappear." "Then I'll feed you all again," she said softly, echoing the words that had become a promise between them. "Every day for the rest of our lives." "Is that a yes?" he asked, heart pounding. "Yes," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "It's a yes." He kissed her then, beneath the cottonwood trees that reminded him of home but without the pain that memory once carried. There would always be a place in his heart for Mary and the children, but he had found room there for Beatrice, too, room for a new beginning, a second chance at the life he'd thought was forever lost to him. They were married in October, after the harvest was in. The ceremony was small, held in the town church, with Bennett giving away the bride and neighbors serving as witnesses. Beatrice wore a new blue dress she'd sewn herself, and Beau wore a suit borrowed from Bennett, freshly pressed for the occasion. By spring, the new cabin was finished, built on a rise overlooking the creek with windows facing east to catch the morning light. They moved in just as the first wildflowers began to bloom, and Beau picked a bouquet for Beatrice, placing them in a jar on the table just as Mary had once done. "For new memories," he said, kissing his wife's forehead. "And to honor old ones," she replied, understanding as always. 2 years later, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, a symbol of the future they had built together. As Beau held his newborn child, he felt the circle of life continuing, the promise of tomorrow held in his arms. And when Bennett teased them about needing to build an addition to the cabin for their growing family, Beau just smiled, looking at Beatrice with their daughter nursing contentedly at her breast. "We've got plenty of room," he said, "for everything that matters."